Retro Rewind, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Welcome to Retro Rewind, the show that plugs you back into the pixels, polygons, and personalities that shaped the world of gaming. Today, we're setting our time machine for the early 1990s to look at a console that didn't just succeed its predecessor, but defined a generation. It was a gray and purple box of magic, the canvas for some of the greatest video games ever made, and one half of the most legendary corporate rivalry in entertainment history. Today, we rewind to the era of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The King's successor. To understand the arrival of the Super Nintendo, you have to understand the world it was born into. By the turn of the 1990s, Nintendo was not just a company, it was a kingdom. With its Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, it had single-handedly resurrected the North American video game market from the ashes of the 1983 crash, and achieved a level of market dominance that seems almost mythical today, capturing nearly 90% of the global market. The NES was king. But the 8-bit monarch was aging. On the horizon, new challengers were emerging, armed with powerful 16-bit technology. NEC had the TurboGrafx-16, and a brash, ambitious rival named Sega had unleashed its Mega Drive, known in North America as the Genesis. Sega wasn't just selling a console, it was selling an attitude, aggressively marketing the Genesis as a faster, cooler, more powerful machine. Nintendo's then president, the famously sharp Hiroshi Yamauchi, saw the writing on the wall. He recognized that the Famicom, the Japanese NES, was seeing sales slow down. In a 1988 interview, he stated that Nintendo simply continued to support its old hardware, players would eventually get bored and move on to better quality games, creating what he called a dangerous situation for the company. Nintendo's move to the 16-bit era wasn't just a matter of innovation, it was a matter of survival. The king had to defend his throne. The birth of the Super Famicom, a forced hand and a glimpse of the future. The task of creating this royal successor fell to Masayuki Uemura, the same lead architect who had masterminded the original Famicom and NES. The project, which would become the Super Famicom in Japan, was a direct response to competitor pressure. In fact, Yamauchi's initial announcements about the console in 1987 and 1988 were calculated strategic moves, designed to disrupt Christmas sales of the rival PC Engine by promising something bigger and better on the horizon. It was a glimpse into the sharp, even ruthless business acumen that operated behind Nintendo's family-friendly curtain. The development of the console itself was marked by two collaborations that would prove fateful. First, for the processor, Nintendo partnered with Ricoh, who had been granted exclusive rights by the Western Design Center to produce a custom 16-bit CPU based on the 65C16 architecture. This chip was a direct descendant of the processor in the NES, a decision that would give the new console a unique performance profile compared to its rivals. And the second collaboration is the stuff of legend. For the console's audio, Nintendo needed something revolutionary. They found it in a young, ambitious Sony engineer named Ken Kutaragi. Working in secret without his supervisor's knowledge, Kutaragi designed the console's sound chip, the Sony SSMP. When his bosses at Sony discovered the clandestine project, they were enraged. Kutaragi was nearly fired on the spot. But in a pivotal moment, Sony's then CEO, Norio Oga, stepped in. He saw the potential in Kutaragi's work and gave him permission to complete it. This single decision not only gave the Super Nintendo its signature near-CD quality audio, a massive advantage over the Genesis, but it also forged a relationship between Kutaragi and Nintendo. This partnership would lead them to begin work on a CD-ROM add-on for the SNES. When that deal famously collapsed, a spurned Sony, armed with Kutaragi's designs and expertise, would go on to build its own console, the PlayStation. The very component that gave the SNES its beautiful voice was the seed of the machine that would one day usurp Nintendo's throne. An explosive launch. On Wednesday, November 21st, 1990, the Super Famicom launched in Japan. The public response was explosive. The initial shipment of 300,000 units vanished from shelves within hours. The launch created such a public frenzy, what was described as a social disturbance, that the Japanese government formally asked video game manufacturers to schedule all future console releases on weekends to avoid disrupting school and work. The demand was so intense that the console even attracted the attention of the Yakuza, forcing Nintendo to conduct Operation Midnight Shipping, delivering the consoles to retailers in the dead of night to avoid robberies. With its new 16-bit powerhouse and the loyalty of key developers like Square and Capcom, Nintendo had successfully defended its home turf and reasserted its dominance, but the real war was just beginning. The Great Console War. Welcome to the next level, a clash of cultures. The battle for 16-bit supremacy now shifts to North America. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES, launched here on August 23, 1991, nearly 2 years after the Sega Genesis had already arrived. Sega had used that head start to build a formidable beachhead, and it wasn't going to give it up without a fight. What followed was arguably the greatest marketing war in entertainment history. Sega brilliantly positioned the Genesis as the cool console. Its marketing was edgy, aggressive, and aimed squarely at an older teenage audience. Commercials were punctuated with the now iconic Sega scream and slogans that took direct shots at the competition. Most famously, Genesis does what Nintendo don't. The face of this rebellion was Sonic the Hedgehog, a mascot who personified speed and attitude, the polar opposite of Nintendo's slower, more deliberate Mario. Nintendo, meanwhile, stuck to its guns. It maintained its family-friendly image, emphasizing the unparalleled quality and magic of their games. Every SNES console came bundled with a copy of Super Mario World, a statement of confidence in their software. This wasn't just a choice between two gray boxes, it was a defining cultural battle, fought on playgrounds and in living rooms across the country. You were either a Nintendo kid or a Sega kid. There was no middle ground. A clash of philosophies, hardware and design. This cultural war was a direct reflection of the two consoles' fundamentally different hardware philosophies. Sega, with its deep roots in the arcade scene, prioritized raw speed. The Genesis was powered by a zippy Motorola 68000 processor clocked at 7.6 MHz. This made it a beast at handling fast-paced action games, shooters, and sports titles. This speed was the technical reality behind their brilliant marketing buzzword, blast processing. While the term itself was more marketing mythos than a specific technical feature, it perfectly captured the feeling of playing games like Sonic, and it gave Sega fans a powerful weapon for playground arguments. The SNES, on the other hand, made a trade-off. Its main CPU was significantly slower, clocked at just 3.58 MHz, which could sometimes result in noticeable slowdown in graphically intense games. But what it lacked in raw processing speed, it made up for entirely with its specialized support chips for graphics and sound. The SNES could display 256 colors on screen at once from a massive palette of over 32,000, creating visuals that were far richer and more vibrant than the Genesis's 64 colors on screen. And then there was the sound. Ken Kutaragi's Sony-designed audio chip delivered rich, multi-layered sample-based music and effects that the Genesis's FM synthesis chip simply couldn't touch. You can hear the difference. It's the lightning-fast twitch of Sonic the Hedgehog versus the lush atmospheric world of A Link to the Past or the soaring orchestral score of Final Fantasy VI. The battle for market share. For several years, the two rivals were neck and neck. Sega's head start and aggressive marketing gave it an early lead in North America, but Nintendo's strategy of consistent, high-quality game releases eventually won out. The Super Nintendo went on to become the best-selling console of the 16-bit era, moving 49.1 million units worldwide compared to the Genesis's still impressive 29 to 30 million. The tide turned as Nintendo continued to deliver masterpiece after masterpiece, while Sega began to fracture its audience with a series of expensive and poorly supported add-ons like the Sega CD and the 32X. By trying to extend the life of the Genesis, Sega diluted its focus and its resources, just as Nintendo was hitting its stride. The war was long and brutal, but in the end, the kingdom stood firm. For our listeners who want a direct comparison, we've put together a hardware showdown table in the show notes.
First up, the CPU. The Sega Genesis runs on a Motorola 68000 processor, clocked at a speedy 7.6 MHz. The SNES, on the other hand, uses a Ricoh 5A22, running at just 3.58 MHz. Winner? Genesis, thanks to that raw processing speed. Next, on-screen colors. The Super Nintendo can display up to 256 colors on screen at once, while the Genesis maxes out at 64. Winner, SNES, hands down. Speaking of colors, total palette size, the SNES offers a whopping 32,768 colors, while the Genesis supports only 512. Another win for the SNES. Resolution comparison, the SNES supports up to 512 by 448 pixels versus the Genesis at 320 by 224. Winner again, SNES. Sound showdown. The SNES uses the Sony SSMP, delivering 8-channel sample-based audio. The Genesis counters with a Yamaha YM2122, featuring 6-channel FM synthesis. While both have their fans, the SNES tends to offer richer, more complex sound. Winner, SNES. And finally, the standout features. The SNES brought us Mode 7 graphics and enhancement chips built right into the cartridges. The Genesis hit back with its now iconic blast processing and faster CPU. We'll call this one a tie, since each had its own unique magic. The Nintendo difference, tech and innovation. The controller that shaped the future. While the console war raged on the surface, Nintendo was quietly laying the groundwork for the future of gaming with hardware innovations that are still with us today. Nowhere is this more evident in the Super Nintendo controller. Designed by Nintendo of America's Lance Barr, the iconic dog bone shape was a massive leap forward from the hard-cornered rectangle of the NES. But its true genius lay in two revolutionary additions. First, the 4 face buttons. By adding X and Y buttons above the traditional A and B, Nintendo created a diamond layout that dramatically increased a player's options. This was essential for the new wave of complex games, especially arcade fighting games like Street Fighter II, which could now be ported home with their full range of moves intact. Second, and perhaps most importantly, were the shoulder buttons. The L and R buttons were a paradigm shift, giving players 2 more inputs they could access with their index fingers without ever moving their thumbs from the face buttons. This opened a whole new world of design possibilities, from strafing in first-person shooters to quickly cycling through items in an RPG. This design was so effective, so intuitive, that it became the undisputed blueprint for the future. When Sony, after its failed partnership with Nintendo, developed its own console, its first PlayStation controller was, for all intents and purposes, a Super Nintendo controller with hand grips attached. That design DNA, the diamond face buttons, the shoulder buttons, is still present in every major controller from PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo itself. The sound and the spectacle, Mode 7 and the Super FX chip. The SNES also had a few more tricks up its sleeve, special hardware features that gave its games a unique visual identity. The most famous of these was Mode 7. This was a built-in graphics mode that allowed the hardware to take a single flat 2D background layer and scale and rotate it in real time, creating a convincing illusion of a 3D environment. It was the magic behind the futuristic twisting racetracks of F-Zero, the dynamic courses of Super Mario Kart, and the vast explorable world maps in role-playing games like Final Fantasy VI. It was a visual flourish the Sega Genesis simply could not replicate in its hardware. But Nintendo also had a brilliant solution for its console's slower main processor. Instead of releasing expensive hardware add-ons, they pioneered the use of enhancement chips built right into the game cartridges themselves. This was a Trojan horse strategy, smuggling more powerful hardware into the system on a per-game basis. This kept the console's initial price down while allowing its capabilities to evolve over its lifespan, a key advantage over Sega's market-fracturing peripherals. The most famous of these was the Super FX chip, a powerful coprocessor designed in partnership with a British studio called Argonaut Games. The Super FX chip gave the SNES the power to render true, real-time 3D polygonal graphics, something thought impossible on 16-bit home consoles. The stunning result was Star Fox, a groundbreaking 3D space shooter that looked like nothing else at the time. The chip was also used for advanced 2D effects, like the incredible sprite scaling, stretching, and rotation that brought the bosses and world of Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island to life. It was a testament to Nintendo's clever, forward-thinking approach to hardware design. The Library of Legends, more than just games. Ultimately, a console is defined by its games, and this is where the Super Nintendo built its immortal legacy. Its library is a veritable hall of fame, filled with titles that didn't just entertain, but that perfected existing genres and in some cases created entirely new ones. This was the golden age of 2D game design, and the SNES was its canvas. The perfection of the platformer, Super Mario World. As the pack-in launch title, Super Mario World had the monumental task of showcasing the new console's power. It succeeded not just with brighter colors and more sprites, but with a revolutionary approach to design. The game introduced a sprawling, non-linear world map riddled with secret exits and hidden paths, encouraging exploration and replayability on a scale previous Mario games had only hinted at. It also gave us Yoshi, who wasn't just a cute dinosaur to ride, but a versatile new gameplay mechanic, a living power-up with his own unique abilities. In a 1991 interview, Shigeru Miyamoto explained that simply porting Super Mario Bros. 3 with better graphics felt hollow. They had to innovate on the gameplay itself. This meticulous, layered, and intuitive approach to teaching players through design became the gold standard of Nintendo polish, a benchmark for quality still revered today. The quintessential action-adventure, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. If Super Mario World perfected the platformer, then The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past perfected the action-adventure. It took the grand promise of the original NES Zelda and realized it completely, creating the definitive blueprint for the series for decades to come. Its central innovation was the dual-world mechanic, allowing Link to travel between the idyllic light world and a twisted, corrupted dark world. This effectively doubled the size of the game and formed the basis for some of the most intricate and satisfying puzzles in gaming history. With its rewarding exploration, iconic item progression, and universally acclaimed design, it's no surprise the game holds a Metascore of 95, cementing its status as one of the greatest games ever made. The pinnacle of the JRPG, Chrono Trigger. The Super Nintendo also served as the cradle for the golden age of the Japanese role-playing game, or JRPG. And for many, the absolute pinnacle of that era is Chrono Trigger. Assembled by a dream team of creators from the Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest series, with iconic character designs by Dragon Ball's Akira Toriyama, the game was destined for greatness. It pushed the genre forward with innovations like visible on-screen enemies that eliminated random battles, and a dynamic battle system featuring powerful combination tech attacks between party members. But its most profound legacy was the popularization of the New Game Plus feature. Upon finishing the game, players could start over with their character levels and equipment intact. This wasn't just a bonus feature, it was intrinsically woven into the game's time travel narrative, allowing players to challenge the final boss at different points in the story to unlock over a dozen different endings. It fundamentally changed how players approached RPGs, transforming a 60-hour one-and-done epic into an endlessly replayable adventure. Honorable mentions: a roster of masterpieces. The depth of the Super Nintendo library is staggering. We could spend hours on Super Metroid, a masterclass in atmosphere that helped birth the Metroidvania genre. Final Fantasy VI, an epic tale of rebellion with a cast of 14 playable characters and an actual opera scene. Or Donkey Kong Country, which used groundbreaking pre-rendered 3D graphics to create a visual style that blew players away. The list of masterpieces is nearly endless, a testament to the creative explosion the console ignited. The legacy in design. The Super Nintendo's time in the spotlight eventually came to an end, succeeded by the 3D-focused Nintendo 64. But its influence never faded. Its legacy is a powerful dual-pronged echo that resonates through the industry to this day. On the hardware side, its controller design became the foundation for how we physically interact with games. And on the software side, its legendary library established the conventions and quality standards for countless genres, from platformers to RPGs.
The retro renaissance. Today, the SNES is more beloved than ever. In an era of hyper-realistic graphics and games as a service, there's a growing appreciation for what the 16-bit era offered. For many, it's a powerful dose of nostalgia, a direct link to childhood. But its appeal goes deeper. The console's 16-bit pixel art has a timeless, handcrafted quality that is aged far more gracefully than the blocky, primitive polygons of the generation that followed. The games themselves offer a kind of purity, deep, satisfying mechanics without the bloat, tutorials, and microtransactions of many modern titles. And thanks to services like Nintendo Switch Online and high-end modern clones like the analog Super NT, this incredible library is more accessible than ever, ready to be discovered by a whole new generation. Final thought, the canvas for creativity. In the end, the true power of the Super Nintendo wasn't its clock speed or its color palette. Its true power was its role as a stable, versatile, and inspiring canvas. It provided a generation of the world's most talented game designers with the tools they needed: rich colors, layered sound, an innovative controller, and the potential for expansion to create art. The result was a golden age of creativity, a library of games that have stood the test of time not just as products, but as some of the most enduring and cherished interactive experiences ever made.